Good morning.
Morning.
Well, I guess afternoon, dude. I normally shoot with your mom at 10 a.m., so I'm always like, good morning. Well, guys, we've got Steven back with Night Eye Paranormal. I'm so excited. We did that effortless, like 2.5 hour episode the other day, and obviously we gotta have you back. So I'm so happy to see you.
Yeah, it should be fun.
And we just ate the best Thanksgiving food. Dude, that was so good. I was so happy. But okay, so we're going to jump in. I kind of wanted to we're going to talk about the paranormal investigation aspect. And you and I have shared a couple of experiences, and I'd love to talk to you about some of the experience I haven't gotten to share with you, and even talk about some of the ones we did I got some questions still, like about that bullheaded energy with the human arms from that one property. We'll get into that later.
Yeah.
But I remember just being like, whoa, this is beyond me. And then portals.
Definitely.
But okay, so your mom one time said something about you regarding this, and I can't
Mhm.
remember if I ever asked you about it or if it came up again. But yeah, I can't remember. So she had said something basically to the effect of you had this natural propensity to opening portals when you slept.
Mhm.
And so to anybody listening, that sounds absolutely wild, and like I get it, but believe it or not, portals are a legitimate thing. And that's something I wanted to ask you about, because let's just break down legit what is a portal.
So a portal is basically an opening to another realm or a different location than what humans typically experience or what the living typically experience. I mean, a portal can be pretty much anything, honestly. It just depends on the intent that's put into the portal as to what comes through. And in the case of like opening it in your sleep, if you don't put an intent, it's basically random what will come through.
Okay. So whenever I have a suspicion about something, this might be the dumbest thing I've ever said, but you tell me. So a long time ago, I was driving towards South Dallas. It was early in the morning because I was going to go help my friend take Christmas photos of her dog.
Mm-hmm.
So we were trying to get the light right kind of as or before sunrise. I was driving, and to get there from my place, there's this raised sort of access road. And I looked up and I saw a building that I grew up in DFW. I grew up with the Dallas skyline. Like, I've seen it 100 times. And something about it that morning, I focused in on one building and I just started sobbing uncontrollably. And I felt very strongly that something absolutely horrific was happening. And I felt that it involved kids that were very young.
Mm-hmm.
And it was at the daybreak. And I pulled over on the side of the road and just was crying and freaking out. And I almost called your mom because I just was like, I don't know what to do.
Mm-hmm.
And then I kind of did the only thing I thought was appropriate, which was I just asked, like, can there just be light shed on that building? Like, whatever is going on in there.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's the Trammell Crow building. It's that pyramidic structured building that's over there. I've always seen it, but I never noticed it like that. What I always find very interesting, it sits right behind that Chase building that has that keyhole in it.
Yep.
So I have a functional belief that that is sort of a portal charging system.
Could very well be.
And it felt like something of that nature was occurring that morning. Now,
Mm-hmm.
obviously I sound crazy. I'm okay sounding crazy. But it was just this absolutely like visceral hatred for what I felt. I don't even know what was happening. And then kind of when I asked my guides, like, why that time? The response I got was that there was an attempt to desecrate the night and the day. So for some reason, it was important to have it be at that crossover time.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, there's nothing anyone can do about that. There's nothing, like,
Yeah.
I still feel to this day, like, the first question I would ask was like, I wanted to like ask if I wanted to sing, you know, like, it's so dumb. There's nothing, but,
Mm-hmm.
and that's the only experience that I've ever had where it just punched me in the side of the face that I thought, like, dang, I don't know what's going on, but it's something really nefarious.
Mm-hmm.
And it's in such an expensive, you know, but.
So in that case, part of me wonders if it was an accidentally created portal. It is relatively common for people to make things architecturally or artistically without really realizing that they're making a portal at the same time, just with the energy that they're putting in. And when someone does that, it's very easy to step in and kind of dictate what comes through. And normally the people who do that are of the darker side, just because I rarely, if ever, would have a reason to step into a place with a artistically designed portal and be like, oh, let's change this and let's
Let's
control what
command
comes
it.
through. I
Wow.
mean, most of the time, the effort would be in closing it rather than trying to change what's in it.
In
But
closing it, what does that mean?
it just means getting rid of the portal, making it
Oh,
so things
got it.
can't come through as easily. It's not destroying the piece or anything like that. It's just energetically making it so things don't step through.
So, whenever you were younger, like, is that pretty common within children, like within teens, or was that very specific to you and your bloodline?
It can be relatively common. It does kind of depend on the individual as to how often it happens. Mine was essentially every night, but as you're kind of approaching puberty, it tends
Ramps
to
up.
force things up, and you'll see children doing things that typically wouldn't even be within their skill set, even as an adult, where
Mm.
they just, I like to think of it as kind of experimenting and seeing what works
Mm-hmm.
unintentionally. But when you have a propensity for something like that, it just amplifies it tenfold.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so, whenever that would happen to you and you would wake up,
Hmm.
was there a knowingness that something had happened of that nature, or did it just seem like it was nobody would notice it until something weird started happening?
It was pretty early in my study and things, so I didn't really
How
catch on
old?
to what was going on. It was more of a something's weird every night,
Mm.
or there's something here. I mean, I was even experiencing things like sleep paralysis almost every single night with that, and it was just more of a understanding that something was strange going on, and it was a little bit early into my mother delving into it too. And
Mm.
given my age as well, I don't think she really wanted to discuss it as much with me. So
Mm-hmm.
there wasn't really much acknowledgement as to what it could be as a child.
Why do you think that was?
Well, for one, I mean, my father was very, very against that kind of stuff. Very much like, oh, that's crazy. That's just
And they were
stupid.
still together?
Yes. So when it was
I always
really
forget.
bad was when they were together around elementary school. And it just, even if that discussion was made with me, I don't know if I would have been able to understand it.
Oh, that's fair.
Yeah.
Yeah. Dang. So because you probably it wasn't like this was known to you. All you knew was that this is wigging me out and my bedroom's weird.
Yeah, pretty much.
So
That entire house was kind of weird, though. I think some of it was due to the portal stuff, and some of it was just due to the location. If you ever get a chance to go there, you should just drive by there. I'll tell you all the information on it off camera. You don't need to go in or anything, or even go into the backyard, even though you kind of can. Just driving by it, though, you get a really weird feeling at that place.
well, it's weird because I'm a little bit numb to stuff like that because when I was outside of Terry's family home,
Mm-hmm.
like her nephew was bone white. She was incredibly activated and taking an aggressive protective stance, and I didn't
Mm-hmm.
feel anything. So I don't know if it was just shielding from me specifically, but I did
So
not.
it might be a little bit different in that circumstance, though, because that house is very intent on getting people to come in.
Mm,
So it is more of a let's draw it here as opposed to the house in New York is very intent on keeping people off the land.
mhm.
So it is complicated in that way.
Yeah.
You
Well,
would
I definitely
probably.
felt I felt curious about this window that
Mhm.
she later told me was the garage. So I definitely, and I
Yeah.
knew, I'm studious enough now to know like none of that curiosity was mine. But that was probably the one thing that I felt at all was, oh my gosh, I really want to know what's behind in that window. And then
Hmm.
of course I just stayed way away because that's not. But yeah, okay. But you feel like I would be able to feel something weird here.
Yeah, just a little backstory on that house. It was sold around the time when I was entering college, and that was maybe 8 years ago, roughly 8 or 9
Mm-hmm.
years ago. And it was sold to a real estate developer who was intending to resell it, fix up the house. Well, they have done almost nothing in that house. And basically, all they did was tear up the front and backyard and then tear out everything from the inside and then just left.
Wow.
There's still tools sitting inside of the house, so it's very clear that the team that was working on it just up and walked away, basically.
Ran out.
Yeah. We still keep in contact with the neighbors, so the neighbors kind of know if we're in the backyard, so they kind of assume that we're not going to, we're not someone breaking in. We're just
Yeah.
kind of looking through it. And last time I was there, yeah, there was even like a soccer ball sitting in the house. So ignoring all the tools, there were even like personal effects that people brought in that they just left. So that was a little bit wild, and to
We're
me, it kind
presuming
of,
they left too.
well,
But
yeah,
do
absolutely.
we know? I'm just kidding.
Well, I don't know.
Right. Well, so go ahead,
No, you can go ahead.
please.
No problem.
Well, okay, so you've been back and you've been inside.
I have, yes.
Would you go again?
Yeah, I would, but that's mainly my curiosity, not and also kind of knowing what was there. I don't
So what
think
was there?
it's complicated. We'll talk a little bit off screen on that one.
Okay.
It's
What
a
can
lot
you
of stuff,
share?
and it's probably a little bit too advanced to fully get into on a podcast.
Mm-hmm.
But it was darker stuff. It was stuff that was feeding off the land too. But
Really?
yeah, it was complicated.
Had something negative happened on that land before the house was there?
We're not sure, but that whole area has been kind of weird in general.
And the
Like
other houses aren't involved?
a few of the other houses started experiencing things after we left.
Okay.
And a few of the houses around us, like I was in contact with one of the neighbors at one point, and they were talking about how things started really acting up in their house, just
Once you guys
roughly
left?
about a month after we left.
Because the food was gone.
Yeah, absolutely. That house, just kind of in general, really wants someone to prey on.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not really a location that I would recommend anyone like investigate or
No.
even try to
That's why we won't
investigate.
say it.
Yeah, well, there's no point.
Yeah.
You're not going to get rid of it because people don't occupy it anymore. And all it's going to do is just kind of open you up to things that you don't want to be opened up to.
Or like the hitchhiker phenomenon come back with
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, pretty much. Part of me thinks a very large portion of it is trapped in that house, but there definitely
Mm.
is stuff that bleeds through and out of that
Mm-hmm.
house. I mean, even growing up in that house, a lot of my friends would see things there. A lot of
Mm-hmm.
people wouldn't want to spend the night. A lot of people would leave in the middle of the night.
Mm.
And on top of that, I mean, we had probably 9 or 10 attempted break ins at that house when we lived there, and none of the houses around us experienced that at all.
That's so
But
weird.
even the neighbors saw people try to break in one weekend when we weren't there. It was really strange.
Weird. Dang, it just really wanted. Do you think even us discussing it has this like ears perked effect or not really?
To an extent, probably.
It would have to, right? Because it's like,
Yeah,
oh no, someone's talking about me. Hope like I wonder what I can get involved type
yeah,
thing. Yeah.
to an extent, definitely. But I also kind of think that because it has been so long since someone's occupied the house, it's hyper vigilant to anyone talking about it or
Mm-hmm.
thinking about it. So if
Yeah.
someone was currently living there, maybe it wouldn't be an issue at all. But with it being completely open and empty, now it's kind of a problem.
Well, same as like the New York house.
Yes.
There was sort of, I discussed it with Terry on that 2-part podcast recently, but like it had been dead for a while.
Hmm.
And then only recently it seemed like there was a new energy who had been dealing with it.
Yeah.
And then
So
weirdly, that energy was the one that got ripped apart on the property later because it was trying to go collect stuff.
I feel like, and this is just my personal opinion, I don't think I share this opinion with my mother at all. But
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it was dead. I think it was waiting for an opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
With them having a new child right before everything kind of went to hell
Amped
over there,
up.
it divided their attention, which whatever was there might have seen as the opportunity to step in. Now, again, that's just my personal opinion. That's not based on anything,
No,
honestly.
totally. Well, and Derek had held the opinion basically that this energy was new to the land, but
Hmm.
was basically hierarchically above the father.
Hmm.
And so he was brought there because basically it was debt collection time.
Mm-hmm.
And whenever basically your grandfather was out of currency or any value really,
Mm-hmm.
then that energy got brought to this land because it felt, according to Derek, he was just like, this is not supposed to be here, but he's here
Yeah.
because of my grandfather,
Yeah,
which
absolutely.
I thought,
And regardless of the situation, in both cases, it could very well have been a new energy
oh
entering
my
in.
God, you guys are cousins.
Yep.
I just realized that. That's weird because there's such an age gap.
Yeah. Huge age gap.
But yeah, you guys are technically first cousins. Oh my
Mm-hmm.
goodness, that's crazy to think. Anyway, go ahead. Sorry. That's
Well,
wild.
yeah, I kind of think that regardless of why it happened, it definitely could
Hmm.
have been a newer energy entering in. It just could have been something that was already on the land bringing it in.
Yeah, which
And
would be your, yeah.
given that I wasn't there during that specific event, my opinion kind of doesn't really hold as much water. But
But your opinion's still better than anybody else I talked to about this, other than
mhm,
your mom.
yeah.
Like, dang. When we were doing the investigation within that antique store, I'm not going to say where it was or whatever, and there
Hmm.
was a chair. Do you remember the chair
Yes.
that? Okay, I want to talk about that chair. I didn't get to that day
Hmm.
because there was too much other stuff going around, and there's more about that investigation I'd love to talk to you about.
Hmm.
I'll try to sanitize it as far as who's involved and all that as I do it, or I'll cut it out later. Okay. Whenever it was said essentially that that was made for the purpose of being a portal,
Hmm.
what it like walk me through really what that means and why somebody would do that.
So it does kind of complicate things with antiques in general. I'll add that little caveat because during the time frame when that antique was made, it was significantly more likely that people were more knowledgeable about these things and
Yep.
they were more accepting that it exists.
Yes.
So, with that specific chair, I believe someone made it a portal for some kind of either ritual or seance where they could call something through that chair to meet with them when they were trying to do these seances rather than just kind of asking the world and letting whatever portal appears
Mm,
appear. The process isn't as complicated as you would think. Basically, for permanent portals, you just have to have kind of a material that powers itself. You kind of have to have a shape that kind of leans towards portals in general. In that case, it being the circle and all of the stuff around it. But also the way that they even scratched in the detailing on that specific circle to kind of make it look like it was a wave around it kind of added to that as well. Yeah, so they were very specific on what materials they picked for that chair. It's actually
mm.
pretty rare for them to use just straight copper for a chair. It's normally plated if they want to use the color, but that was completely just copper. And that tends to be very good at kind of powering itself through the environment in general. So it makes it last a
Wow.
little bit longer. Now, I will add, I don't think that that portal was done for any nefarious intent. I think it was rather benign to an extent. What it was
Because you
bringing
sat
through
in it.
yeah. What it was bringing through was nothing bad by any means.
Yeah.
And in that whole investigation, there really wasn't anything bad. It was mainly just a few grumpy old guys in spirit and just people walking through looking at their old stuff.
Well, what about
That
that thing in the back room?
yeah, that's a bit different, but I wouldn't necessarily call that evil or dark.
Yeah.
I would more say that that was something that was basically claiming the space as its own and wasn't really connected to anything.
Mm-hmm.
And it really just wanted a place to be.
Mm-hmm.
And in my mind, and I kind of differ from a lot of ghost hunters in this opinion, but I mean, things exist that we don't know of that aren't alive. And they have to exist somewhere in this world. There's not really a reason to try to get rid of those things unless they're actively harming people. And
Mm-hmm. I agree with
that
that.
that one was just kind of stepping up, kind of just showing that it was angry, but it wasn't really being physical. It wasn't
No, I
really
agree.
heavily impacting anyone's emotions. So there was no real
Ooh.
negative impacting factor for it being there other than basically, oh, you can't go back here. This is mine. I'm going to be angry if you're back here, but I'm not really going to do anything about it.
Okay, which is sort of defensible. Like, that's
Yeah.
okay. I mean, right? So, but it's interesting that you said it wasn't really affecting anyone's emotions because
Mhm.
that is sort of the nefarious thing you would look for.
Yep.
Am I suddenly out of nowhere terrified for no reason?
Yeah.
Or am I somewhere out of nowhere angry for no reason?
Yeah, absolutely. And on that investigation, I was kind of keeping a close eye on everyone who was involved. Now, just for context for the podcast, this was a investigation class that I teach. So these
Mhm.
were beginners that were there. This was not an entire team that was like well seasoned. But
Yeah.
I was keeping an eye on the other class members, well, my students, I guess, and
Yeah.
making sure none of them were reacting in a way that would kind of point
Be
towards it
detrimental.
being something detrimental. And it seemed like the only real reactions they got to that back room was some of the newer people felt a little bit scared, which in investigation in general, as a newbie, that's just what happens.
Yeah, that has to be okay, right?
Yeah. Um, Now, we have done other houses and other locations during that class that it has been a completely different story.
Oh, yeah, we're gonna talk about one of them.
Yeah, absolutely. But in most cases, I'd say that story is relatively benign. Pretty much the only thing that you'll get from it is just an energy attached to the antique, which in most cases, as long as it's not jewelry, isn't a big problem. Jewelry kind of is because that energy, as you wear it, can kind of change how you feel and act. But with like just basic furniture, it's not as big of a deal.
So during my training with Terry, there was a period where we were going over psychometry,
Mm-hmm.
and she gave me her parents' IDs, which I'd read the book. So the book doesn't have their real names in it, and I'd already forgotten what their legit names were. So I had no idea that that's whose IDs they were. I should put two and two together too, because like who else would she have IDs of? But I didn't. And then the only other thing that I had to meditate on was a ring that had an initial on it,
Mm-hmm.
like a signet ring. And so I did the meditation over the cards, and I was pretty fucking accurate
Mm-hmm.
about what their personalities would have been like.
Mm-hmm.
But then when I was doing the one with the signet ring, it's the only time that Terry's ever pulled me out of a meditation.
Hmm.
And it was weird because right when she pulled me out of it, I was in a room that now I look back and I think I understand what the room was. I think it's this room that person died in.
Mm-hmm.
But I was looking over and there was like a fireplace and I was looking into the flame. And I don't
Mm-hmm.
remember approaching it necessarily, but I don't know where Terry's like, and that's enough. And I kind of wigged me out because I was like,
Yeah.
oh, well, like, why? And she was not necessarily the most forthcoming about it at the
Mm-hmm.
time because I was just your student. And then way later, she was like, yeah, it was just getting kind of dark. And
Yeah.
now we recognize that that individual the owner of that ring was a victim of her dad. And what's crazier is that, so remember when her mom went nuts?
Mm-hmm.
And they moved her to go live with her sister.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the crazy mom who's lost it and like running around naked on the floor had enough sense to want to take that with her because they found it in the sister's house,
Mm-hmm.
but like in one of the drawers, which is
Yeah.
just a weird thing, man. Like it's a weird. You're crazy and you're getting moved because you're crazy, but you still want your trophy. You still want
Yeah.
that's weird. But I guess people who do that are weird.
It is super weird.
Ugh.
I do want to touch on one of the reasons why she likely didn't tell you everything in the moment
Mhm.
when she pulled you out. So with investigation, there is a big rule where you're not supposed to kind of explain everything that's going on during the investigation inside of the location that it happened, just
Mhm.
because it can, for darker energies, it can kind of power them up and make them realize that you're noticing these things and make them try to push harder. So we like to, in any investigation where there's something dark going on, kind of step outside to have those conversations. Now, that doesn't mean like if you hear something, you don't say something, but it does
Right.
mean that if it's like banging on the walls or you notice some kind of weird symbol showing up somewhere, that you don't really point it out until you're outside.
Well, so the only experience I've ever had one-on-one was your mom had a client that was like up north somewhere, like it would be a drive to get there. And long story short, stuff was just going crazy at the house. TVs were being broken. They were being momentarily possessed to where the woman had literally just put up all of her Easter decorations
Mm-hmm.
and then like woke up out of a fog and had been taking them down and throwing them away. And
Weird.
just yeah, very, very much activity. Like some other stuff that was kind of dangerous was
Mm-hmm.
happening too. And so I was showing it for class. I had class with her on Mondays, every Monday, and it was supposed to be for 2 hours. Oftentimes we'd go to 3 and 4 because we would just talk.
Mm-hmm.
And so we get there and we're kind of chatting at the beginning. And she's like, you know what's weird? She had a doctor's appointment that morning. And she
Mm-hmm.
said that she'd been a little bit dizzy that morning, but that the night before she'd yelled at Brian. She was like, I never really do that. Like, I don't even know, da da da. And then we get in the class going. And then she starts on an anecdote about her family, which at the time I didn't know her very well. So I was
Mm-hmm.
obsessed with anything she would tell me personally about herself or anything. And I noticed immediately that I was getting dizzy and that I couldn't hear her anymore. Like
Mm-hmm.
I could hear her verbally, but I'm locked in always with her. And for me to know that she was talking about her family and like matters of the heart, and I couldn't
Mm-hmm.
even focus and I couldn't figure out why. And then I very, very strongly felt that no matter what, I shouldn't tell her that I was having these issues. And then I felt something by the door, which if you're familiar with her old office at Prana Haven, it was that like smaller room, but the door points out that way. Well, she would always sit, like if you walk in facing the wall, and I would always sit facing the door.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt, I was pretty good by then, and like I could feel something by the door. But the thing that caught my highest attention was the fact that I didn't want to tell her, which was a big thing for me because then I was like, I know I need to. So then I was
Mm-hmm.
like, hey, I'm so sorry. I can't even understand what you're saying right now. And I feel that it's incredibly important that you be in the dark about it, which makes me feel like that doesn't make sense. And we immediately stopped and she went and we were in that store. So there was Palo Santo. So
Mm-hmm.
it was just that's the first time where I've experienced it where I thought, yeah, something else is in my head. There's no reason why I wouldn't tell Terry that I don't feel well and I
Yeah.
feel dizzy and I can't understand anything. Like it was one of those where I don't know if I would have believed anybody if they told me, "Oh yeah, that's what can happen," if I
Mm-hmm.
hadn't felt that. And that's the lowest level of contact, you know what I mean? Like that's nothing compared to what you guys deal with,
Yeah.
but it still was not nothing.
Yeah.
And it was a good
Absolutely.
lesson.
And those kind of feelings can go way past that too.
Yeah.
There was a place that I used to investigate on a regular basis, and I think we talked about this on the last call.
Oh yeah, the bridge.
Yes.
Yeah.
I believe I discussed a little bit about the person who went with me who just couldn't remember anything that happened at that
Oh
bridge.
no. I don't remember that at all. You didn't talk about that.
Okay, so I was going on an investigation with one of the people that I would go with on a fairly regular basis out there, and they had gotten touched in a way that was kind of not okay at that bridge, spiritually not.
No, right.
And I was trying to discuss it with them after, and they basically were like, "So when are we going there? We haven't gone there yet." And it's like, okay. So I started quizzing them to see if they were just like full of shit or messing with me. And there was a lot of stuff that they just would not believe. And I mean, just basic stuff too.
And you
Like,
were there. They were just there.
yeah, yeah. And it was basic things. It wasn't like experiences that happened there. It was when I picked them up, when what we drove past on the way there. And it was like they blocked out this massive portion of what happened just on the way there and right after leaving. It was
Do you think that that was their guides protecting them or an
no.
effect of whatever touched them?
I think it was an effect of whatever had interacted.
Wouldn't you think that that energy would want them to know how to get back there?
Yes, but also that person had gone there a few other times with me. And I think that what was there knew that what it did would prevent them from coming back. It would be some kind of block. It would be too much, basically. So it kind of stepped in and removed that. So they still wanted to
Would
go to
come
that location.
back.
Yeah.
That makes total sense. So basically, they don't want to scare away the food.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, that's what my
Yeah,
gut
that
said too.
location kind of in general is where I've experienced things that I've never experienced anywhere else. And that was one of the really standout events that happened that was just really odd.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, yeah. So, well, and do you think regarding sort of can humans be portals?
Yes, but it's more complicated than that.
Okay.
Something on them can be a portal. I don't think their whole body could be a portal, for one.
Mhm.
And also, blood kind of in general acts as a natural portal. That's why you hear all of these things with blood magic and sacrificial things. But it's not in the way that we've discussed portals prior. It's a little bit more loose and vague. Yes, they can use themselves as the conduit to call things through, but it's not something that you're just going to have something randomly pop in.
That's fair. You know, have you been following along with like Dune, the movie, or have you ever read the books or anything?
I read the books. It's been a long time.
But you know the concept of like the ancestral memory and the
Yes.
prescience. Okay. I'm curious about this. Is there something to that from the perspective of throughout someone's bloodline is the blood of every ancestor you've ever had, right?
Hmm.
So there is a reason to believe that we have this portal tethered to them because their blood is in us.
Yeah, I can see that. It definitely makes it easier for you to connect to previous ancestors through the blood. It's not so much that it's going to always be there, and it's not so much a situation that is the be all end all of it.
Yeah.
There is a lot to be said with the different emotions surrounding family in general, be them good or bad, that can
Mhm.
attract those specific entities back also.
Well, wait, what do you
Um,
mean entity? I just mean real ancestors. I don't mean
yeah,
entities.
I use entity kind of as a vague statement for
Oh,
spirit
okay.
in general, just
Cool, cool, cool.
because it kind of broadly covers everything.
Everything? Yeah.
Yeah, because if I'm saying spirit, then that'll be human energy. But if I say entity, it can encompass things like nature spirits, it can encompass
Mhm.
demonics, it can encompass angelics. It's just a vague catch-all, basically.
Perfect. Sorry.
Yeah, no problem. I just you get people who are of those kind of bloodlines who have no response ever from it.
Yeah.
So it's complicated to fully say that that is concrete and exact, that that's how it works.
Right. Because we
It
don't
definitely,
know.
yeah, it definitely factors in, but I think it factors in a little bit more loosely than we even really realize.
What do you think? So, whenever there was that thing that happened on the property,
Mm-hmm.
one thing that Derek talked about was he said that there was mass of energy, of ancestral energy that sh- showed up in response because he basically was like saying, because I asked him all these questions, I was like,
Mm-hmm.
you know, how many people were really part of the tribe when it all went down originally? And he
Mm-hmm.
didn't feel that it was very large. Yet he said he felt that there were about 200 energies in that uh,
Mm-hmm.
enclave at the time, and there would not have been that many people that died from the poisoning.
Yeah,
So what do you think? Like that's more what I was asking about is like we have a bloodline tied to our ancestors. How often can they come help us? Like how often
gotcha.
can they come be with us? In
So,
that case, they showed up to help
mhm,
or to stabilize the energy. I don't know.
yeah. So, I don't really think there's a set number. I think that they can show up when they want to, but it is entirely dependent on that ancestor's specific feelings
Them
towards
wanting
things.
to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To me, in video games where they have like waypoint markers,
Maybe.
like
I've
quests
played a
where
lot of
it
games.
shows on the map where you're supposed to go.
Oh yeah, yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I think it behaves a little bit more like that, where you can kind of always know where they are, but you don't necessarily have to go to them.
Mhm.
Almost like just doing random side quests in between
Mhm.
going on the main story. I think that the connection is there, but there's no requirement for them to show up. There's no like, oh, you definitely should be here, even if you're called upon.
Interesting. Okay, so like no Mulan stuff where it couldn't be like ancestors hear my prayer, like help. Like if you were in a bad situation, what would and all your other stuff was kind of like, would you ever be like, hey, ancestors, I need some help. Like there's a lot of y'all. Come on.
I mean, you could ask, but that doesn't mean that they'd always say yes. For
Yeah.
me personally, that's not really where I would lean on, honestly.
Yeah.
Partially because a lot of my investigations, at least lately, have turned way darker than what was originally understood it
Anticipated.
to be. Which, speaking of which, lately things just in general have been kind of worse. Just with spirituality, with all of the energies that are out there, and I don't fully have a reason for that yet, but there's been a massive uptick in negative events that have happened and negative spirits sticking around. Now, back to your question about bloodline connections. With good bloodline connections, like they were actually good people when they were alive, they would most likely respond to you and come. They would
Can
probably
they do
hear it,
anything?
see it. Yes, but not more than another energy could.
Yeah.
It's just that when people expect to call upon bloodline energy, they expect more energies to be there. And in numbers, they have a little bit more strength as opposed to just calling upon one individual. So I think that that's one of the major reasons why people are dead set on calling in bloodline stuff, just because they'll get more answers than just one entity or spirit.
Well, I would imagine that if, if I have a lot of spiritual strength and a lot of stubbornness in my will.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's that I lean on when it comes to things that scare me.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think of things like if I were ever in a bad situation, you know what I mean? I would presume that there'd be somebody up the chain who would
Mm-hmm.
be willing to show up for me and willing to it in whatever numbers, because I wouldn't want to be there alone,
Yeah,
is
I
all.
understand that.
With no expectation that they would do anything for me, but
Mm-hmm.
more just if I can show up with some numbers because I'm scared,
Mm-hmm.
dang it, come on,
Yeah.
That's the only reason I ask, is because I'm trying to understand, would that even be a thing? Because logically it would. But
Mm-hmm.
you're perfectly right. Just like when I talk to people and they're like, can you talk to my grandma? And I hate to be the one to say, like, she's not around at the moment, because everyone thinks they're always around all the time. And it doesn't really work that way.
Yeah, and
And if you're disinterested in life, they're probably disinterested in death,
oh, absolutely.
which people
Absolutely.
don't love that either. And I hate to say it, but it is true.
A lot of people say that when you become a spirit, your emotions are dulled. I kind
Hmm.
of disagree. I think that there's specific key points that are dulled, but there's also other things that are amplified.
What are
So
you talking about, before or after they cross over?
both, honestly.
Okay.
I think that if someone is a negative person, and I don't mean negative like depressed, I mean negative like evil,
Their worldview. Oh,
yeah,
you
then
mean
that's
like bad,
only
bad?
going to get more extreme after they pass. I don't think that it's going to get better, personally. If someone's a very good person, it's also going to get more extreme once they pass. It's
Well,
just,
it's like alcohol. It's like it's a distillant.
yep.
But so what about that sort of, so when we always talk about when energies cross through, they have a tendency to have more understanding about sort of, like, people say your truth, my truth, and the
Hmm.
truth. They seem to have a greater understanding of the truth, like
Yeah,
what happened, what impact they had. But that, so you're saying they could cross over and still kind of be like that POS?
pretty much. If they have an idea of what their impact is and just don't care, then they kind of know how far they can go at that point. So they're going to
Mm-hmm.
lean on it more. And on top of that, there are a very large number of spirits that, because they're spirits, feel like, oh, well, nothing can happen to me now. I'm invincible. I'm going to do anything I want. And that's kind of where you see a lot of the amplification of negative aspects of their character coming through.
Mm.
And that's also why you see some of the numbing of some of the other emotions, because they determine that those don't matter as much.
And then there's no world experiences to tether them to those feelings anymore.
Nope. I mean, they might have
Yeah.
memories of those experiences, but
But those fade
yeah,
fast.
yeah, they
Like
fade
my
fast.
dad
And
didn't
oh, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, sorry.
No, you
Well,
can.
my dad didn't pass until a year and a
Hmm.
half after he died,
Hmm.
and I was training under Terry pretty much consistently that whole time, and I would never ask her about it too much, but, like, the one time we did talk about it, he had been very present with just saying stuff like, "I didn't know cats could have such big personalities because we never had
Hmm.
inside cats, and I have 2." But
Hmm.
towards the end, I kept trying to I'd be, like, in my kitchen a lot while I'm cleaning or something and be like, "Hey, dad, like, if you wanna cross over, you can." Just kinda trying to
Hmm.
talk through it. And you know how I call them Terryisms, but she sometimes doesn't say all of it.
Yeah.
Sometimes, and so she basically said, like, we want to be careful that he doesn't feel like you're trying to push him out,
Hmm.
which I thought was interesting because obviously that's not what I was doing. I wasn't trying to. I was trying to help him cross, but that's a very
Hmm.
human misunderstanding of like,
Yeah.
why do you keep asking me to cross? Like, and then towards the very end, one of the last things that Terry ever said really about him was that he kind of forgotten what he was doing, and he was like, how do I get out of here?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So enough time had passed to where the tethers were starting to disappear.
Yeah, and when energies don't cross or take a long time to cross, they kind of start almost fading away a little bit, just in
Yeah.
who they are, what their opinions are. But for the energies that have crossed, experiencing those kind of things, I think it leads more towards, I mean, we have multiple lives. We reincarnate, we do all of this. Why would you be so obsessed with your most recent?
You wouldn't. And that's what I try to, yeah. Especially if it didn't do much for you, you're going to even
Yeah.
want to distance from it.
Yep.
Yeah. It's oftentimes, the ones that are around a lot are
Mm-hmm.
always like the grandma energies that just got super invested right at the end, or like, or somebody who feels they owe somebody something. They're usually around, quite more present. But yeah, I try to tell sometimes clients, I'm like, I don't, it's not a disrespectful thing,
Mm-hmm.
but you've had hundreds of kids. You're going to really fixate on your most recent set.
Yep.
It probably just isn't quite that way.
Yeah.
But then again, it is sort of rare to be able to interact with somebody like us.
Mm-hmm.
So I think more often than not, sometimes there will just be energy that's just curious and very, very
Yeah.
curious about this experience and not even really invested with the person who's sitting in front of me.
There is kind of the insidious side of that too, where because a lot of energies do become disinterested in their most recent life and the goings on of their family, that something else will step in and pretend to be them.
Mhm.
And to me personally, I think it is, at least initially after the loss, it's kind of important to distance yourself from trying to communicate with them. And I
Mm.
know that in the grieving process, that's difficult, but it leaves you open to a lot of things that you don't necessarily need to be open to that might make things worse. There needs to be kind of a cooling off period between death and when you contact them next. And a lot of mediums out there don't really follow that cooling off period. And I'm not saying that all of them don't. Obviously, I'm sure you have a certain period of time where you're like, nope, just let them be. It's not
Oh,
helpful for you
yeah.
to do that. But there are a lot of people out there who will kind of prey on people's
Well, they can't really
grief.
talk.
Yeah. Well,
That's,
not
by the
only
way,
can they
like,
not talk, they're adjusting to a
I
new
tell people that
plane.
all the
Yeah.
time. I'm
They're
like, dude,
they're
they don't even know the language yet.
yep.
And if you're lucky, because this happened to me twice, one time before I met Terry and one time with Terry, where somebody came in and spoke on behalf of, because they're better in energy because they've been there longer. But the reality is, I always tell people, like, we can't even get to him directly. Like, he doesn't know how to communicate. There's just feelings of love, feelings of support, or like feelings of regret sometimes. Like, you can get some of those out.
Mhm.
But when we think about how we communicate and what that needs to look like to understand, they can't really do that yet.
Yep.
And plus, why
And
would we, like, I tell people they're tired too. Death is really tiring. Dying is very tiring. And so if they died 5 weeks ago and you're wanting them to be robust enough to go and have a long form conversation about what you feel they owe you, that's
yeah,
not fair.
no, it's
That's really
not.
not fair. I tell
And
people that.
in a lot of cases where people are trying to reach out to their, someone who had died recently, there is a darker element that will step in place because it knows that that's basically a gap for it to enter. And that's where you get a lot of people who get haunted right after someone in their family dies. And it's very rare for me to see family members haunting other family members unless someone wrongs
Yeah.
someone really badly. But it's pretty common that after someone dies, someone does get haunted by something else because they thought that they were talking to their family.
Oh, yeah. One thing Terry said that I thought was perfect, kind of on this topic, was she said, "Why would your mom be, or why would your grandma be up in the attic?"
Yep.
Just she, it was just such a great point, because if you have somebody, they're gonna be in the kitchen with you. Like, they're gonna be, like, I've had messages where there was a grandmother who used to always stand over by the oven,
Mm-hmm.
and I said, I think I see this energy, and she's always chilling by the.
Mm-hmm.
And then my client was basically like, "Oh my God, my son always says that's where he thinks, that's where he sees her." And the
Mm-hmm.
reason is, she used to cook a lot. whenever someone cooks over there, she likes the smell of it. And these are just things she's like, I miss that. Like, spirit always misses the more tangible things of this world, usually food, music, things like that. And so, and the creative processes, they really miss those. And cooking is creative, making music is creative. But it's like that's where they'll be, or they'll be. I see a lot of energy typically around someone in the bloodline that isn't directly in the family of the client. So, for instance, like almost every single time, my guides will point me towards someone, and I won't even know. They don't even give me. This is like what I'll say. You've got of the newest generation, who's the second oldest. And whoever's baby that is, it may not be theirs, it may be their brother's, but that is who grandma's around a lot.
Yep.
Because, and again, this is even the worst part. They're not very often around their favorite. They're very often around the one that's struggling the most.
Yep.
So those energies are there to support someone not doing well, not to just go hang out with their fave. So all these things are like hard to explain to somebody hoping to just hear that, yes, she's everywhere and she's always around, and I was the favorite grandbaby, and so she's around me.
It's even harder with people who lose children, for example, because I'm going to be honest, the kid is almost never sticking around. Some people believe that something steps in and sweeps them up because they're a child. I can agree with that, but I also am of the opinion that that's someone who's never experienced being individual free from their family because they died at such a young age. The first thing I would do if I was in that situation is go explore freaking everywhere. I don't think I would be just hanging out around the family the whole time. I would be unbound. I'd be going anywhere I wanted to go. I'd be playing around, doing things. I wouldn't be sitting around waiting for mom to feel better. In that
fair, I think that a lot of times with the younger deaths, they run the risk of having such a fearful reaction. They create a gravity well, and I think that's what they're kind of trying to be protected from. Because that's a lot of really creative energy, a lot of uninhibited creative, especially if they haven't hit puberty. It's quite a pure creative force. And so I definitely think it has a tendency to attract the good and the bad. I think the good probably has first dominion because they haven't even really been locked into this earth in the same way. Now, I think that those, like, once you've gone through that change, the creative process where you are now able to be creative with your body, I think those are different rules. And I think that that's where, I feel terrible. Any teen who has an early death, I think that can that can get dicey because I don't think that they fall under the same protection. But yet, they're still probably not any more mature than that person who died before the change.
Yeah.
I think it's a very unfair reality, but it seems to be a reality. There's rules for if you've locked into this experience or not. Which it sucks. I think it's so unfair, but it is what it is.
Yeah, and as an investigator, I kind of am not big on hearing, oh, there is a child haunting this location. It's almost never that.
Never.
And there are a lot of investigators who will tell people
I just got
that
goosebumps.
it is, partially to make them feel more comfortable, and partially because they really haven't experienced enough in investigation to understand that that's really almost never the case.
Also, if you hear like a little kid giggling, you're just going to assume that that's a kid haunting, that it's not something that's like, oh, yeah, no. We know how to do this too.
And that doesn't mean that there aren't children that haunt certain locations. It's just much more rare than people make it out to be. I mean, you watch all these ghost hunting shows, and it's like almost every other episode, they're like, oh, yeah, this is a little girl who's haunting here. We're playing with a ball with them. It's just not that way.
I just got a feeling or a message, basically, and this is horrible, but I think it's true. If there was a collective of activity of children, I think the predication would be that they all would have had to die together for them to stay together in spirit or stay active as children in spirit and to push away any form of help. Because it's still free will, man. If you're there and angelic energy says, hey, come with me, and you say no, I think you're still allowed to. And the only reason you would at that young age is if you had others around you that also were saying no. And so I don't know why I feel that way, but I feel that that is true, which is horrible because we know about the victims.
Yeah, that's kind of where the difficult part of doing investigations kind of stems to, too. Most investigations are pretty basic. They're just see if we get responses,
Pew,
see
pew.
what the responses are. With a lot of cases, you have to juggle what the homeowner or business owner feels. Because if you give them information that isn't what they're ready for, they're either going to reject it or they're going to obsess over it. And
Mm,
both responses aren't a good thing.
yeah.
So it's kind of, it complicates things. The hardest part of any investigation is always the people. It's never the
Mhm.
spirits, even for demonics. Actually, especially for demonics. Because you
Yeah.
can get rid of a demonic as many times as you want, but if the person it was attached to is still thinking about it or doing things that might bring it back, it's just going to come right back.
Or still under the influence of.
Yeah. Well,
Which brings us
go ahead.
kind of to, there was a property that we were on together, and to give examples, because I don't have a background in paranormal investigation at all, but I
Mm-hmm.
was helping you shoot your class.
Mm-hmm.
So I was there collecting footage of it. And one of the things that winds up being collected, of course, is sort of not the music box. What do you call it? Where
The
somebody is, I can't remember the name of
which
it.
investigation are you talking about? Are you talking about the
We're talking the
furniture?
one with the, no, I'm talking about the one with the energy that was collecting the younger souls that was outside under
Yes.
the rocks.
Yes. Okay. Um, I'm trying to remember. That one was so long ago that it's kind of
It's
difficult.
the one where he shut off all your stuff,
Yes. Yes.
which was so bad.
So that investigation was interesting. The biggest problem with that investigation was that in the process of getting rid of the energy, someone who was involved had asked for them to show that they were there by turning off electronics. Well, the electronics didn't save because the data got corrupted when they were turned off, and we
Mm,
had everything go out at once. So
mm,
it made that entire investigation very difficult in general and made the reveal to the homeowners almost impossible.
hmm.
But back
But
to the
it's
music.
fine. They brought it back anyway.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, they almost always do, it feels like. In your question with the music box, I'm not sure I fully.
It's not a music box. It's the box that we listen to when somebody has their headphones on and we ask, what's that called?
Yeah, the spirit box.
Spirit box. Okay, and we don't rely on that entirely, but I definitely have some interesting footage of that.
Yes, absolutely. Spirit box tends to be a very good way for beginners to figure out how to communicate with entities and spirits.
Hmm.
It can become a crutch, though, where people will
Yeah.
only use that. And the process that you see on TV for most of the shows isn't really correct, where they just have it sitting out and going over its own speakers. That is how you mishear things. That's how you hear things that aren't in it. Really, what you're supposed to be doing is you're supposed to go into a faux sensory deprivation where you get rid of all sight and you put yourself in a state where you can only hear the box itself through like noise canceling headphones, things like that. And you don't really want to be touching anything most of the time. It's better to kind of sit in one place and do it and not be in physical contact with anything. The biggest problem with that, though, is because it is your interpretation of what you're hearing over it, it's very up to, the individual to decide what is actually happening and what isn't. So,
Also, what the individual is like, because sometimes you'll be on the spirit box and some wild stuff will be happening. I sit down and none of it. So there's reality with that too.
yeah, it's one of the devices that I use it, and I use it for investigations, but I don't rely on it. It's kind of initially just a way of like getting a spirit engaged so that it'll interact with other things.
Well, and
That
they'll
be
jockey for it too. So it's not always helpful, because realistically, like we said about just having clients and people showing up because they're just curious about that experience,
hmm
you'll have energy just show up just because like they want to
Yep.
just have a chat.
Yep. It out of everything, it's probably the least useful tool, honestly.
Yeah.
Honestly, anything that vocalizes what's going on is somewhat not useful. Even voice recorders.
You want the electric.
Yeah,
evidence.
I want the evidence where it's actively interacting with something in the environment rather than just hearing something. Because there is an issue with a lot of people really wanting to hear something and hearing things that
Yeah.
just are not happening.
Yeah.
Unless I get like ridiculously clear EVPs, which would be through the voice recorder.
Will you explain those?
Yeah,
What's
so
EVP?
EVPs are basically, they're called electronic voice phenomena. They are when the spirit tries to reach out through a device that can emulate its voice. It's basically like all the shows that you'll see where they're asking questions on a voice recorder and they'll get a response, be it whispers, be it a full voice. But I don't like to rely on those typically unless they're incredibly clear. Partially just because when I'm investigating and looking for things, I'm kind of hoping something happens. And then the other part of it is we don't know what was going on in the environment when we got those necessarily. Unless you're recording every single step of the way, which just isn't reasonable unless you're on one of those TV shows. It's not,
Mm-hmm.
you don't know if someone else said that. You don't know if that was said from someone outside. And
Oh, that's a good point.
some of these voice recorders are so sensitive that I mean I can hear people across the street in their house with mine.
Mm,
I mean it's just going to sound like whispering and dull noises, but I
but it
can still
reaches that
hear it.
far.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's not really a tool that is to be relied on that heavily, but does it make good TV? Yeah, it does. And that's why you see a lot of people use it on their.
You have you never use, we've talked about it before, but you probably have some form of a leg up just as far as you are very intuitively gifted.
Hmm.
Plus, you have a greater understanding of the things that bring and let go these energies anyway.
Hmm.
But you've always said, like, I can't, it's all inadmissible. Just because I say
Hmm.
I know that I feel that this is here doesn't mean
Yeah.
I can present that to a client.
Yeah.
And that's probably very frustrating.
It is, but also I kind of have to turn off a lot of my perceptions on investigations just because it's easy to be led down the wrong path with that as well, especially if it's a
Mm,
darker investigation.
hmm
And I mean, it's easy. These people brought you in to do a ghost hunt. Most of them clearly believe that there's something there. But it is hard to convince someone that all of the feelings and all of the different abilities that people have are real.
Oh, yeah.
Most of these people are not people that are in that community. They're people who
No.
are just, they see there's a ghost hunter, they've had all these weird things happen in their house. Someone needs to come in and tell them what's going on. And it just overcomplicates things to add in other just
Forms of,
information that's kind of erroneous to them anyway.
yeah.
I mean, if yes, there are plenty of investigators that walk into a house and they're like, "Oh, I feel this, I see this," but there's no evidence to back it up.
Mm-mm.
So the only thing the person is left with is, well, now I have to trust whether or not this person is telling me the truth. Now I have to see whether or not this information is real, if any of the things that they're feeling are actual things that people can have.
I always feel that if there's an intuitive involved, they just need to be glued to the hip of the historian
Mhm.
to pick up details that could allow the historian to look up for evidence.
Mhm.
So, for instance, like if you see somebody in that space and they're dressed in like a theater costume, well, then you can go and find out, oh, before this was it was this.
Mhm.
That makes sense. And then it might lead the historian down to a deeper truth.
Mhm.
But past that, it is all inadmissible.
Yeah.
If you think about, like, almost like a court, right? Like,
Yeah.
it
Absolutely.
can maybe help you, but, like, that's why when Terry works with law enforcement, like, they will never admit that they talked to her. 0% of the time. But is the body still found or not? You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
Absolutely.
It's
The
a
other.
thankless job.
Yeah, it is. And the other thing about having an intuitive in the group is you really only want to have one on an investigation. Even if other people are intuitive, you don't want them speaking out about what they're feeling. And it can never be the very first thing you do when you
Mm-mm.
walk into a space.
Or it'll just morph into what you just said.
That, and also, it is less credible. If someone
Yeah.
just walks in and they're like, oh, I saw this, we're going to investigate that.
No.
It it doesn't really. The ghost hunting shows where they have someone come in who's an intuitive typically bring them in about halfway through, and I don't think you need to wait that long. But also doing it at the tail end or at the very beginning just doesn't work typically.
Makes sense.
Yeah. The other thing is it's important for someone who is not actually part of the investigative team to be the one who does the intuition, because you don't want them to be influenced by the events that they saw in that location priorly.
Absolutely. Good
So
point.
it overcomplicates things in a lot of cases to bring in an intuitive, especially for a smaller investigation team.
Yeah,
And
that makes sense.
I've had plenty of classes where people have just been like, oh, I'm feeling this, I'm seeing this, and then they would miss everything that was actually happening because they were chasing basically unicorns around the
Yeah.
building. It just doesn't work.
Dang.
And it's really hard with a lot of the classes that I teach to explain that to the people who are intuitive,
Right.
because they almost take that as an attack.
Yeah, an insult to what they
Yeah,
do or something.
when it's just what's beneficial to the investigation in general. You're not going on an investigation, well, at least if you're doing it professionally, you're not going on it for you in most cases. You're going on it for the people who asked you to go there.
Right. Great point. With the electromagnetic aspect of it. So this is more for my own curiosity, but this is my belief system. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
curious what you believe about that, what you think of it. And if you think I'm really dumb, say it here loud and proud because I'm so open to it. Okay. So, but what we recognize at this point is that the currency of everything is energy.
Mm-hmm.
And the currency or the we have the technology for, which is probably incredibly limited, but it's what we got. It focuses on the electromagnetic.
Mm-hmm.
And there's an argument to suggest that our entire reality is based on just this toroidal electromagnetic dance.
Mm-hmm.
And whatever we see and can touch and can't permeate is just our frequency of
Mm-hmm.
standstill matter. And that, for instance, like the ghosts who zap your computer for extra energy, for extra juice, basically,
Mm-hmm.
they exist in this like quite just one hair off of a frequency to being physical, like
Mm-hmm.
we are. And then obviously that's also the realm where other things exist as well as, for instance, like the angelic realms.
Mm-hmm.
We would not probably in this meat body be able to ever raise our consciousness up high enough to go to where they are. They're going to always have to come to us,
Mm-hmm.
typically. So with that said, you know how there are electromagnetic weapons that with the government within the military complex.
Mm-hmm.
So what would prevent the use of those against like a demonic energy or something that is in that realm space of basically that very next level, that electromagnetic frequency that we can pick up sometimes? Like for instance, the green to the red. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but apparently back in the olden days, all the gear that was issued through our military was the infrared,
Mm-hmm.
and it kept basically revealing demons. And so you had dogfighter pilots who were claiming to see these things floating in the sky
Mm-hmm.
that weren't. So then they changed it to green, and whatever that is now, it seems to be more effective in not showing that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my question.
So, for the people who aren't super into the conspiracy theories, I'm gonna inject in one of the weapons that we actually know about that they have said exists. There is a device that they use for crowd dispersal that basically sends certain energy waves into a large crowd and causes. It's basically microwave. It's a large scale microwave that they'll send into the crowd, and it will cause them to feel extremely uncomfortable and disperse. And that, I mean, that was even on future weapons, honestly. But
Yeah, we
that
know
being,
we got it.
yeah. Um, that being said, using that against demonics, I think it's complicated because then you have to go with the mindset that the government is admitting that they're there and believes that they're there. And I feel like,
Well, no,
on,
I guess like we had like imagine we just overrode like say I did something to short out that microwave,
Mhm,
which is going to create a huge burst of electric
mhm.
energy. Would that feed the entity or would it drive it away?
It depends on the wavelength and the wavelength of the entity itself. The biggest thing with that is since we can't physically see them or physically
Mhm.
or like actively hear them, it's difficult to know whether or not you've made things worse or made things better.
Mhm. Yeah.
And even using intuition in that front, the entity might have just left. So you think that you've made it better, but it's just going to come back. I
Mhm.
think that without better ways to fully observe a lot of these things, that it's kind of dangerous. I do know a lot of investigation teams will use things like Tesla coils and Jacob's ladders to do something similar to try to get more reaction in the environment. We have
What's a
seen it.
Jacob's ladder?
Jacob's ladder is, we can probably pull it up on the video just so everyone understands what I'm explaining, but it is basically two wires that have an electrical current going between them that jumps between the wires constantly.
What should I put, like, for, let's say, paranormal?
Just look up Jacob's ladders. There's plenty of videos on YouTube all over the place of them. And it's not necessarily just paranormal either. It's pretty much everything.
Well, a movie came up, so I'm gonna have to
Mhm.
paranormal. I just want to get it. I just want to look at it.
Yeah, go look up Jacob's ladder Tesla
You're
coil.
gonna laugh. Okay, that makes more sense because you're gonna see what I'm. What is this? Can you see that?
No, I can't.
Oh wait, let me see. Browser lacks system permission to share screen. Dang it! All right, I was trying to share my screen so you could see this weird. Yeah. Okay, can you see that now?
Yes, I can. Yep,
What is that? That's what I mean. I'm like, I don't think I'm gonna need more help.
yeah,
All right,
that's definitely not what it was.
let's go Tesla coil. I was like, I don't think this is what you want me looking at. Is it this?
No, scroll down a bit. Second one.
This? Okay,
So it's
that's cool.
basically the device that in investigation we use the energy arc to kind of send that energy into the environment, and
Oh, to
that
agitate.
to agitate things.
Wow.
I will say that's one of the things that's kind of more considered hocus pocus than investigation. It's one of those things that you like have to be really deep into things to actually believe works, but it does to an extent. The problem with those though is you can't really determine what specifically is feeding on it as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that leans back towards using energy to fight demons, quote unquote, would be you don't know what the fallout is of that. Even if it did work, you don't know what other energies are nearby to cause that
Mm-hmm.
to work. And I just think it would be a little bit short sighted to do that
Yeah,
without a better way of understanding things. But there
that's
is a
super fair.
really cool tool that you might be interested in that on TV it looks fucking stupid, but there actually is science behind it.
What's it called?
It's called the God Helmet. Is let me pull up the article on that so I can read it to you. It's from
Well,
a
actually, I know what you're talking
yeah,
about.
yeah. So
Yeah.
basically a Korean scientist developed a device that's supposed to make it easier for well, so the listeners know, make it easier for you to communicate with higher realm energies. But a lot of investigations will use that kind of to see if they can see the things around them. Again, that's something that is open to individual interpretation of what they're getting, and it's also something
Mm-hmm.
that is changing your brain chemistry just a little bit to cause you to see things.
Mm-hmm.
So whether or not that is legitimate for investigation is up for debate, but it does cause people to experience the world in a different way.
Do they ever go back to normal?
Yes, yes, they do.
Okay.
99.99999% do. I'm sure there's some fringe people out there who will say that they don't, but I because it isn't wide scale enough for people to say, "Oh, this completely changed me." I can't really full on say that it does completely change someone, but something like that would be better for using energy against something, just so that because a large portion of the fight against demonic energies or negative energies is being able to interpret where they are, what they
Mm-hmm.
do, and something like that that would change your perception and allow you to see things more clearly would be a more effective weapon than like giant microwave bursts.
Yeah. Dang.
That being said, those are one of those tools. They're also incredibly expensive, but they're not tools that I would bring on a regular investigation either, because they
No.
kind of lean towards the same thing as using intuition on an investigation. Where
Yeah, that's what I would think.
yeah,
It'd be completely conjecture.
yeah, absolutely, it just complicates things. There are a large number of tools that people will use that are just like fluff for the TV,
Yeah.
and not for the client. And I mean, I have some of those too. I use them because they're fun, but I don't
Yeah.
really rely on them, and I almost never show the client any of that information.
No, that's just for you.
Yeah,
You're like,
that's just for
listen,
me.
if I'm gonna go help, I'm gonna play with the toys that I like.
Yep, pretty much.
That's my right. I think that's valuable, man. And you do have some really cool stuff. I mean, I've seen a lot of your gear, all of your gear. Have you ever, and then I'll let you go soon. Have you ever had when you've investigated just for yourself,
Mhm.
right? Like you were telling me one time you were gonna go. Well, you've been to Goatman's Bridge, right?
Yeah.
And you didn't find that to be particularly powerful.
No, but I also went during the day. I didn't really.
You're like, there's only one bridge for me.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
just kidding.
Um,
Just kidding.
I would say Goatman's is.
You're bridge loyal,
Yeah,
okay?
I'm definitely bridge loyal. I would say Goatman's is a lot of it is thought forms rather than actual energies there. And the biggest thing about Goatman's Bridge too is all of the history that they say that would cause it. You can't prove it. There's no way to
No, right.
actually say this actually happened or this person actually lived here and did this. I believe one of the beliefs is a former slave became a goat farmer, bought the territory, and then the white people around them didn't like the fact that they were there and lynched them.
Okay, I
There's
didn't know that there was a
yeah.
story.
Well, there's a lot of people who make historical accounts around it, but doing the research into it, there's no proof that that has ever that
Mhm.
that specific event happened. I'm sure something similar probably happened in that area. I mean, lynchings were common during that time frame, but there is no evidence that anyone owned that land and was a farmer.
And that's true too with Terry's family land
Hmm.
as well. I mean, because and I do believe them, Derek and like I
Hmm.
but that is something that is literally not provable.
Yeah, it isn't. And even when you go back and look at all of the documentation, there's a lot of stuff that there's no documentation on just because of that time period.
Mhm.
But the problem is with Goatmans is that because that belief has been so prevalent, people have basically inserted an entity into that location rather than an entity being there to begin with. And there
Mm.
have been things that have happened there that could cause a haunting. I mean, we know of a death recently that happened there.
No, I didn't know about that.
There was a kid who was
I figure
basically.
by now it's just I would imagine by now it's a site of just demonic practice.
Oh, well, absolutely. You see these weird little, baby's first demonic summoning sigils in that location. There's a lot of kids who go there and screw around. And there are a lot of people who've kind of made the story worse, too, by saying that they're seeing all these people in robes coming out of it, all these evil people, blah, 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 blah. It's kids.
You don't think that there's
No, that location I
okay.
don't think has enough energy to attract the real thing.
Yeah. Isn't that so funny, man? Every Tom, Dick, and Harry thinks that there's like real just because there's markings. And it's
Mm.
like, no, dude, they don't make their holy sites available to random strangers.
Well, on top of that, I think a lot of people want it to be true.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm sure when this video goes up, there's going to be reactions to that statement where, oh, well, no, I've been there. I've seen things. I've done this. Yeah, but what you're getting from there is not the same level of malevolence that you would get in a place that was legitimately demonically possessed in that way.
Yeah. And desanctified enough,
Yeah.
et cetera, et cetera. It's not been charged enough. I think people have tried to do some charging,
Oh, absolutely.
but it's just like affixing a tail to a donkey. It's like someone else might move it. Someone might, like I'm sure a lot
Absolutely.
of people will pray over that area. So you never know when some Christian group is going to come try to cleanse it. And then you're on some level kind of back to square one if you're
Yep.
hoping for some crazy darkness.
Yep. And for a lot of the rituals where you want that level of darkness, you need something of relatively high power scale there initially. And I know a lot of people will be disappointed with this, but it's just not Goatman.
No, I agree. And it's funny because I remember a couple of years ago you talking about it and me being so fearful of the thought of you going, of like all these things.
Mm-hmm.
And as time has gone by and as I've seen more and more in this world, it makes me giggle a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still very wary of people who seem fixated on it or like because it's just a lot of stuff I don't. If somebody else is really really into that, it probably means I should be somewhere else just
Mm-hmm.
cuz I'm not and that's such a rabbit hole. I was in a Discord and I was talking to this kiddo who ordered to his house. This is so funny. I mean, it's not funny, but it's
Mm-hmm.
ordered to his house some like highly like the Satan's Bible, like something. What I can't remember what he said. Whatever it was though,
Mm.
and he said the moment it was there, he picked it up. I believe him. I don't think he's a liar.
Mm.
He never even got it out of the package, and the back of his neck burned so hot, and they just threw it away and never touched it again, and like kind of was whatever. But what I thought was fascinating is like just the desire to own that
Mhm.
and then to have it sent to your place. Well, even if it's not Satan himself, it's something that's like, oh, this is a fun book.
Mhm.
Someone wants this information. Let me go accompany it and eat
Yep.
whoever's reading it.
Yeah.
So it's probably not even as dark as what you think, but it's dark enough to want to mess with you.
Yeah. And
So you just got to be mindful of that too.
yeah, and the other
What
thing
low hanging fruit?
is a lot of people who buy those kind of things are expecting some kind of result, so
Yeah,
it just makes it easier in general. I mean, I have a
you've opened the door.
yeah, I have a massive collection of books that are just kind of sitting around that are for study purposes, just so that I know what's going on. And when you enter into it with the intent of, oh, I'm not really afraid of this, I just need to know more information, it's a little bit less daunting and you don't get as many, negative responses to it.
Right.
But there are books out there that are very evil, that are very bad. I mean, you'll see those as more antique books. You won't see that as the thing that's being mass produced. But some of the antique grimoires, the real ones, are really, really, really intense.
Well, the way that I understand this to be true, and I think this is invaluable actually, is we talk about this from the perspective of we have to understand frequency from the perspective of where do things meet in the physical plane.
Hmm.
So like for instance, for me, the example I give, and it's very polarizing, but it's just part of it, is it's like a rapist and a rapee. Like when a victim and an aggressor have to have each other to meet in the physical world.
Hmm.
And so when you have a text or something that in the physical world is always being active at the point of a massive amount of torture and death
Hmm.
as a way to pay tribute to what you're trying to access,
Hmm.
it's going to take on, it's going to embody it, like it needs that moment as much as that moment needs it.
Yep.
And so now to me, energetically, they have a synonymous title
Hmm.
on some level. And that's why victim mentality is so dangerous, is because all it's doing is beckoning for an abuser,
Hmm.
because it needs that to be classified as a victim. And I'm sure I'll get eat up if anyone ever hears that, but that's true. And so these books, not like you said, not the ones mass produced, because no one's really using those for darkness, but
Hmm.
even, for instance, say that there is a passage in that mass produced book.
Hmm.
And it just so happens, nobody would know this, but that particular passage is used in satanic ritual.
Hmm.
Well, now maybe you're reading it out loud, and every other entity that's ever heard that's like, oh, that's home for dinner, that's lights out, come home, and you've just vocalized it. They're gonna at least be curious.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there's some value to say. I remember there was not a guy. His name's Zerka. He alleges that he was Rosicrucian for a long time. Now he's a man of God, and he basically indicates that he has a lot of gnosis. Seems like, and he actually called on a live stream. He called out a rapper for
Hmm.
having a like a ritualistic necklace medallion. And when I looked at it, I would have never known. So you have to have known
Yeah.
what those symbols meant. And then basically Zerka was like, oh, you do that, huh? He's like, what? Are you sacrificing chickens? And the guy got like kind of nervous and tried to laugh
Hmm.
it off. But it was a call out of like, wow, that the only reason you'd have that is if you were messing with this sacrificial
Yep.
magic. So now you've got this guy wearing a medallion that emulates basically a magic circle.
Hmm.
And so, I would be mindful of like the jewelry we wear can maybe not always be ideal. There's a very popular occult symbol that is considered a sigil of Lilith.
Hmm.
And now it's on jewelry, man. And that makes me really sad
Yep.
because it is very cute. Like it's a cute thing, but it's the moon and the crescents,
Hmm.
which is very old for her. You know what I mean? Like that's pretty old. That's one of her older signs.
Hmm.
And now we got people with earrings and necklaces and tattoos. And
Yep.
I'm just like, dang, this is really a scary time.
Yeah, and there has been kind of a weird upsurgence in the popularity of the darker side of the occult in general, just amongst clothing and just anything, honestly. It's been
Dude, I know. That's why I'm doing it this way now. I never have been involved in trying to debunk any of this or bring light to it. And
Mhm.
I feel very called to because of this, what you're talking about.
Yeah, I don't really understand why that's become such a big deal amongst people. Like,
I
to
do.
have, well,
I think I
I
do.
mean, I get why people would want it to be a big deal, for those things to be a big deal, but I don't really understand why someone would be so interested in the way it looks, because most of the people who are buying those things don't know about any of the practices. They don't know anything about it. They have no idea what, any of these symbols mean. A lot of them don't even know that it's, used in that way. And I don't know what the draw is towards the design in general, because most of it, to me, kind of just reminds me of that crappy tribal tattoo that everyone in the 90s got.
Oh, yeah. But I think it's two pronged, man, right? Like, I think it's the people that are administering it, essentially. I think they absolutely know what's going on
Oh, no,
and
they
what
did.
it's used for. And then I think the people that wear it, we're kind of being taught what we should be into.
Hmm.
Like this new age thing, man, it's got roots in the negative. I can feel it.
Oh,
But
absolutely.
it's just opening all these doors in these people's lives who are just trying to seek positivity and trying to like gain a little bit of control in their life because right now the world feels so out of control.
Hmm.
But then you're opening these doors and you don't realize, and it's unfortunately there's almost a legal system in place with the good and the light and the dark, and it's like ignorance is not innocence of breaking the law,
Oh, absolutely.
and
I
that's
was more
sad. Like it
getting
scares
on,
me.
like, if there was anything that would have been a trend, I don't know why those designs are the trend. Because they
Mm.
are kind of ugly in general.
Well, I think we're being pushed to see it.
Oh,
I don't think
absolutely.
anyone would just pick that. I don't think anyone would just draw it. But now that, you've got 8 TV shows that are glamorizing witchcraft right now in all these random different forms, that's not an accident, I don't think.
Hmm.
You're right. Like we are my belief, and I might cut this, we'll see. I do feel that we are converging on a little bit of a critical time.
Hmm.
I don't know really what that really means, and I don't know what scale of time we're talking about. But I do feel that there has been an uptick in the desire to have us more involved in a spiritual warfare thing, but with full ignorance.
Hmm.
We're supposed to we're supposed to earmark ourselves as players
Hmm.
and then get beat for it is what I think. Because I do think you have to allow a certain level of it in for you to really get messed with in the same way.
Hmm.
And I think wearing things like that probably accidentally earmark you as you're in the game. Why
Oh,
would you not be?
absolutely.
You're wearing Lilith's tag,
Yeah, absolutely. But I was more going off of, there are so many fashion trends that don't stick. I don't
Mm.
understand why that's the one that did, necessarily. I mean, I get why they would push it, but out of everything that, like, would have, would be negatively related or demonically related, that would have been the one that I would think would be least likely for people to be like, oh, that's pretty, that's cute.
Well, I think there's some regional relationship too with like I do believe that Lilith has a
Hmm.
hold in the Smoky Mountain in that region, the Appalachian area,
Hmm.
Tennessee, India, like all that. So I think that if you're a business, I could imagine that if you're a t-shirt owner,
Hmm.
Lilith's going to want her stuff out in that region.
Yeah.
Whereas there might be some other stuff going on in California. There might be some way different stuff over in Italy. Like everyone's kind of got a region, and I do believe that we've got some interesting stuff here.
Yeah, I agree. I just don't understand the consumers in that process at all, really. I mean, yeah, there's some darker stuff that does look kind of cool, but it's not the stuff that you're seeing in modern clothing at all. The stuff
No.
that we're seeing are these weird sigils, weird shapes, and just, it's stuff that's like, really? That's what you grabbed onto? Not.
What do you think about that? I don't have an opinion. I don't know. And if you have this as a tattoo listeners, like I'm not saying I don't know. But what about that? Have you seen that Celtic looking 3 triangles interlocking?
Hmm.
A lot of people went and got that as a tattoo. Do you know what that means? I have no idea.
I don't
Some
specifically know
people
what
say
that
it's the
one means.
Galactic Federation.
Yeah, I don't know. I just,
I'm not laughing, but I'm laughing.
yeah, I don't really know what that one specifically means. I know
Me either.
triangles are a big deal in spirituality in general. I mean, look at Solomon's sigil, for example. Almost all of his sigils are triangle based with a circle around it, but I don't really know what that specific one means. And if anything, I think that that's probably one of the more benign ones anyway.
Mm-hmm.
I just, in all of my reading and studying, that one has not ever.
Yeah, that's what I see what you're saying. It's new to town.
Yeah. And
That's fair.
it's just, I personally think that that's something that someone saw something that looked similar to it, was like, oh, let's change this. But
Mm-hmm.
on that idea, I mean, runes to Vikings were things that people specifically made. There are different runes that you make by combining all of the rune letters, whatever it is, and it's specific to the person who made it. So it might just very well be someone who's taken a bunch of different things and shoved them together. I don't
Yeah.
know that.
No, that's perfectly fair. Do you have a personal sigil? Are you ever going to make one?
I don't really see a reason to.
Yeah.
I mean, for me personally, I think that it's kind of a little bit
It's a little emo,
narcissistic.
right?
Yeah, it's a little bit emo, but it's also a little bit narcissistic to have a personal sigil too. Just
Well,
because,
right.
like, why would I call upon myself to do certain things? What is the purpose of that?
You're like, I'm writing my sigil to make myself do my laundry because
Yeah,
I hate it.
yeah, exactly. I mean, like, if I was in a situation where I felt like I needed something to step in, it wouldn't be myself.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be like,
That's a
oh, I'm
good
going to
point.
call on another version of me to come do this. Well, fuck if I know. I mean, that other version's going to show up and be like, oh shit, I need to call on another version of me to do this because I don't know what the
Well,
hell's
right.
going on. And it's
Have
just
you
going to
ever
be an
seen the Meeseeks
endless system.
box?
Yes.
That's
Yeah.
that would be like that, right?
Yep. Pretty much. It's,
Oh my god.
I mean, yes, you could use.
What did they say? Hi, I'm Mr. Meeseeks. I can't remember the next part.
Yep. Hi, Mr.
Oh my
Meeseeks.
god.
Look at me. Yeah.
Look at you.
Yeah.
Yeah. See, that would be a sigil, man.
That would be exactly what I'd be doing now. It would just be
Oh my
pointless.
god. Or we would be so ADD, we'd make a sigil, forget we made it, and then someone would be like, "Hey, we really need you," and we'd be like, "Me? That is that
Yeah.
mine?
Yeah.
I forgot."
I mean, and I do think for the listeners, I do think having a personal sigil is a little bit different than creating your own symbols for different magic purposes. Just because I know a lot of people will listen to this conversation and be like, well, a large portion of magic is creating your own symbols for certain things, which, yes, that is true to an extent. But when we're talking about personal sigils, we really mean things that are meant to represent ourselves in these
Mm-hmm.
situations. I mean, I'm sure everyone who's worked with magic to some extent has toyed around with making things, but that's totally different than having your own trademark. So,
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm always here on the cautioning side with that stuff, right? It's always very
mm,
important that even if you think that you're creating something new and profound, there's a chance that maybe you're not, and so be very careful.
mm,
Because when we think about the common runes that you can look up on the
you are
internet, other people can look them up too, and then
you
you start
are
squeezing them
completely
together.
cutting out. What did you say?
I was just saying, be very mindful when you
Can you?
start playing with that stuff. But anywho, my dear, I'm gonna let you go. But here, I'm just gonna end this for the recording, but then don't jump out, okay?
Okay.
Thank you so much for being here with me.
Okay.